In our next few stories, the focus shifts, not from a land in Canaan, but now the focus shifts to the scene in Egypt. At the end of our last story, Joseph had been sold and he was being taken to Egypt. And in story 18, we begin to hear of Joseph's experiences there while he was in Egypt. Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Midianite traders who had bought him. Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh who served as captain of the guard, bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites. The Lord was with Joseph as he worked for his master, the Egyptian. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph and that the Lord made everything he did prosper. So Potiphar made him overseer over his house. All that he owned he put under Joseph's control. So Joseph, though he had been sold by his brothers, is certainly receiving special attention from God. And God blesses his efforts, even his efforts in service to the Egyptian officer of Pharaoh named Potiphar. The Egyptians had their own set of gods, and this in no way suggests that Potiphar was a God-fearing man, but he understood that, hey, it was like whatever Joseph did turned out well, so Potiphar put him in control and put him over more and more of the things in his household. Joseph was good-looking and well-built. It wasn't long before Potiphar's wife noticed this and said to Joseph, "Come, sleep with me." Joseph refused and said to his master's wife, "Listen, with me here, my master doesn't have to think about anything in the house. He has placed everything he owns into my care. I have charge of everything except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Joseph resisted the woman's advances. As the days went by, she spoke to Joseph each day, but he did not listen to her and tried not to be with her. One day Joseph went into the house to do some work. None of the servants were in the house. Potiphar's wife caught him by his garment, saying, "Come, sleep with me." He wiggled out of his garments, leaving it in her hand, and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had run outside, she called to the manservants, "Look at this. My husband brought a Hebrew here to mock us. He just came in wanting to sleep with me, so I screamed. When he heard me yell, he left his garment and ran out." She laid the garment down next to her until Potiphar, Joseph's master, came home. Then she said to him, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to try to make love to me. When I screamed, he left his garment with me and ran." Well, when Joseph wouldn't enter into the sin with Potiphar's wife, then she schemed how she could get back at him. And it meant that she would falsely accuse him of making advances on her and of the things that he had supposedly done wrong. She lied, but it would ultimately land Joseph in prison. Wrongly and unjustly accused, she lied about him. And you know how I mentioned we should always keep Jesus in the back of our mind? And we might be reminded of how Jesus was falsely accused, and people lied about what he had done and things he had done and why he was doing them, and that ultimately led to his arrest. When his master heard his story, he became so angry that he had Joseph put in prison, where the king's prisoners were kept. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison, showing him mercy and making the prison warden like him. The warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and all the things they did. The Lord was with Joseph, and whatever he did, the Lord blessed. After all this, the cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, so he put them in the custody of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the guard placed Joseph in charge of them. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker had dreams. Each dream had its own special meaning. When Joseph checked on them in the morning, they looked sad. He asked them, "Why are you so sad today?" "We both have had dreams," they replied, "and there is no one to interpret them." Joseph said to them, "Isn't God the only one who can interpret dreams? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. "In my dream," he said, "a grapevine was in front of me. The vine had 3 branches. It was budding. Then blossoms came out, and then clusters of ripe grapes appeared. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I picked the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and gave the cup to Pharaoh." Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of your dream. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will place you back in your office, and you will deliver Pharaoh's cup to him just as you did when you were his butler. Now remember me when things are going well with you. Help me get out of this prison. Show kindness to me by mentioning my case to Pharaoh. I really was kidnapped and brought from the land of the Hebrews. While here, I have done nothing for which they should put me in prison." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was a good one, he said to Joseph, "In my dream, I had 3 white baskets on my head. In the top baskets were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. The birds ate all of them." Joseph said, "This is the interpretation of your dream. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will take off your head, hang your body in a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Whoa! Talk about a different interpretation. 3 days later, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he had a feast for all his servants. He brought the chief cupbearer and the chief baker before his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position again, and he served the cup to Pharaoh. He hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had said in the interpretation of the dream. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph, but forgot about him. So thrown into prison, if you will, because of the false accusations of Potiphar's wife, God is still at work through Joseph, blessing all of his efforts. And the warden notices this, and so he puts Joseph in charge of some of the other prisoners. The cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, their dreams bother them, and Joseph is quick to acknowledge that really only God can interpret dreams, but he then offers to do so, understanding that his understanding of their dream was really something that God had given him the ability to do. And his interpretations came true very quickly, within 3 days. But somehow the cupbearer kind of forgot things, and I guess never really got around to telling Pharaoh. And so Joseph remains in prison. Story 19, Joseph before Pharaoh. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he stood by the river Nile. 7 beautiful fat cows came out of the river and started grazing in a meadow. 7 other cows came out of the river after them. They were ugly and thin and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. Soon the ugly thin cows ate the 7 beautiful fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke, but he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. He saw 7 full and delicious ears of corn grown on a stalk. 7 thin ears, dry, like they had been blasted with an east wind, grew after them. The 7 thin ears devoured the 7 delicious full ears. Pharaoh awoke again. It had all been a dream. In the morning, however, his spirit was troubled. He sent for all the magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I do remember my faults this day. At one time Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put the chief baker and me in the custody of the captain of the guard of the prison. We both dreamed dreams one night. Each one had its own interpretation. A young man, a Hebrew, a servant to the captain of the guard, was there with us. We told him our dreams and he interpreted them for us, each with its own interpretation. Each dream came to pass just as he had interpreted them to us. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. Quickly they brought him out of the prison and had him shave himself and change his clothing. Then he came in to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard that you can understand and interpret dreams. Joseph answered Pharaoh, I don't have this power, but God will give Pharaoh the meaning of the dreams. Here we see Joseph confessing his faith in his God. And remember, the Egyptians would have had no shortage of gods. They would have had all sorts of gods, God for everything. Even the Nile River kind of representing one of their gods. But here, Joseph is pointing, even Pharaoh, if Pharaoh will pay attention, to the only true God, the God of the Bible, Joseph's God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and his father, Jacob. So Pharaoh told Joseph his two dreams. After he heard them, Joseph said to Pharaoh, the two dreams of Pharaoh really have the same meaning. God is showing Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 fat cows are 7 years, and the 7 full years are also 7 years. The dream is one. The 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 empty ears blasted by the east wind. There shall be 7 years of famine. As I told you, God is showing you what he is about to do. Listen. 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. Then there shall come after them 7 years of famine. All the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt. Famine shall consume the land. The years of plenty will be forgotten in the land, because the famine in the following years will be very severe. Because the famine is going to be so severe, the dream came to Pharaoh twice. God had planned this, and he will soon make it happen. Now, Joseph continued, Pharaoh should find a discreet and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let this person appoint officers over the land who will collect 1/5 of all that the land produces in Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. Let them gather food during these good years, save corn under Pharaoh's authority, and store the food in the cities. The food shall be saved for the 7 years of famine that shall come to the land of Egypt, so that the country will not be devastated by the famine. All the ideas looked good to Pharaoh and his servants. Then Pharaoh said, Can we find a man like this one, in whom is the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discreet and wise as you are. You are the one who shall be over my house. All my people shall do whatever you say. Only I, who sit on the throne, will be greater than you. Pharaoh, as all the Egyptians, would have been quick to recognize that there are many gods. And he saw in Joseph one with whom at least one of the gods had great favor. And in Joseph, this God was at work. And so by appointing Joseph to kind of head this effort to prepare for the years of famine, Pharaoh was taking a bit of a chance in Joseph's God, trusting that this Joseph, there was something about him that was worth trusting. And so Pharaoh takes Joseph, who just days before had been in prison and seemingly forgotten there for some 2+ years. Well, now all of a sudden he is exalted and made really second only to Pharaoh in the nation state of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his ring and put it on Joseph's hand. He also arrayed him with clothing of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. He had Joseph ride in a second chariot that he had. People went ahead of them calling out, "Bow the knee." Remember those dreams that Joseph had about his brothers and eventually even his mother and father kind of bowing down to him? Well, those aren't coming true yet, but you're beginning to see Joseph, who had been sold, who had been a servant or a slave in Potiphar's house, who had been thrown into prison. Now he is exalted to a place of great honor and importance. So Pharaoh made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah. He also gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He left Pharaoh and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced crops abundantly, and he gathered food from all parts of Egypt and stored the food in cities. Each city stored the food produced in the fields around it. There was so much grain that Joseph stopped keeping records because there was so much. During these years, 2 sons were born to Joseph and Asenath. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, because God, he said, has made me forget all my hard work in my father's house. The second boy he named Ephraim, for God has made me successful in the land of my suffering, he said. When the 7 years of plenty ended in Egypt, and the 7 years of famine began, as Joseph had said, the famine was in every country, but in Egypt food was plentiful. When the land of Egypt suffered from the famine, the people called on Pharaoh to supply food. He told them, "Go to Joseph and do what he says." When the effects of the famine became serious everywhere, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold food to the Egyptians. As the famine became worse in Egypt and everywhere else, people from many countries came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain. And so the stage is set. God had used Joseph, and now he was using the 7 bountiful and now 7 years of want to also put into motion things that Joseph and even his family could certainly never have anticipated. But the famine was not isolated to the area of Egypt alone. The nearby or neighboring land of Canaan was also suffering from this same famine. And so before too long, one wonders, will this affect Jacob or Israel and his family all the way back in Canaan? And the answer to that question will come in the very next story.